Welcome to Basta Stories, your gateway to the most chilling, real-life horrors lurking across America. These stories weren't written by horror authors. They were lived. If you think your town is safe, think again. So, turn off the lights, put on your headphones, and listen closely, because the scariest thing is knowing that every word you're about to hear actually happened.
They say privacy is the price of city life, but what they don't tell you is how quickly that price becomes unbearable when the silence starts watching you back. It started like any other desperate decision made after graduation. Cheap rent, fast food, and late-night shifts. I had just finished college and landed a bartending job on the north side of Chicago. Nothing fancy, no salary, no health insurance, but it paid enough to keep the lights on and afford a tiny studio apartment tucked on the third floor of an old brick building. It was mine. That was all I needed it to be. The space was modest, a narrow rectangle of chipped hardwood, pale yellow walls that once knew life, and a kitchenette that hummed louder than it cooled. There was only one window, fixed like a porthole onto the back alley. Not the scenic kind. The kind of alley people only walk through if they have no other option. The kind where the sun forgets to visit. But I didn't care. I was young, broke, and riding on the illusion of independence. I had always believed solitude was freedom, and maybe that belief held true in the beginning. The apartment was quiet. I could breathe in it. I worked nights, so I got home around 2:30 or 3 in the morning, when the world outside was asleep and my thoughts were the only thing still pacing. I'd toss my keys in a bowl, peel off my shoes, heat up leftovers, and collapse onto my futon with a phone in my hand and my brain somewhere else entirely. That routine became a lullaby. I didn't think much about the alley. Not at first. It was always black by the time I got home. Pitch black. The window across the way mirrored mine exactly. Same size, same building layout, just across a tight squeeze of cracked concrete and garbage bins. But that window had always been dark. No lights, no sounds, just a lifeless glass rectangle looking back. For a while, I thought it was vacant. I never questioned it until one night. I stepped inside and flicked on my overhead light. Something tugged at the edge of my vision. A movement. I froze. My eyes instinctively darted to the window across the alley. It was so quick, I doubted I had seen anything at all. Maybe a draft. Maybe my own reflection in the glass. I shook it off. But the next night, it happened again. I walked in, turned on the lights, and as I glanced at the window across from mine, I saw it. A curtain, barely noticeable, shift just slightly, like someone had pulled it back by an inch and then let it drop. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't cinematic. It was a sliver of motion, so ordinary it could have been imagined. But something about it stayed with me. It had rhythm. It had intent. And what unsettled me the most was that the rest of that apartment remained completely dark. There were no lamps, no TV flickers, just that small gesture in the abyss. I tried to brush it off again. City apartments can be quirky. I told myself. Drafts, misaligned curtain rods, old ventilation. I said it enough times, I almost believed it. But over the next several days, that movement returned. Predictable, constant, and always, right after I turned my light on. It didn't matter if it was the ceiling light or the small one by the couch. The second I illuminated my space, theirs responded. Not with light, not with noise, just that one slow curtain parting, then closing again, like an eye blinking in unison with mine. I began to test it. I started leaving the lights off when I got home. I'd wait, sometimes by the window, sometimes across the room. Nothing would happen. No motion, no curtain, just darkness staring into darkness. Then I'd flick on a light, and there it was, the same subtle shift. It wasn't enough to be proof, but it was enough to feel wrong. I told myself people live their lives differently. Maybe it was someone who worked night shifts like I did. Maybe someone who enjoyed looking out windows at 3A. Someone who didn't believe in lights or furniture. But none of that explained the synchronicity. None of it explained the way the curtain only moved after my presence was known. It felt reactive. It felt aware. Still, I kept my logic shield up. The world is full of strange coincidences. What did I have to offer anyone? I wasn't rich, important, or particularly interesting. I was just another girl living paycheck to paycheck, counting tips and ignoring overdue notices. I had more reasons to be ignored than to be watched. And yet, night after night, the pattern continued. I even tried rearranging my routine. Sometimes I walked in and didn't turn the lights on right away. Nothing. I'd wait 10 minutes. Nothing. But the second the bulb lit up, it happened. A delay of no more than 2 seconds. That slice of curtain would slip back, then return to stillness, like a pendulum caught between two realities. At that point, it no longer felt like coincidence. It felt like surveillance, It felt like the beginning of something I hadn't agreed to. I started dreading my own front door. I'd stand outside the building, key in hand, rehearsing the path from light switch to futon, wondering if this time it would happen again, wondering if tonight the timing would change, wondering if it would be worse. It's strange how paranoia blooms in silence. You don't need proof, just repetition. The same moment, night after night, builds its own horror without ever needing to escalate. I stopped inviting friends over. I didn't tell anyone. I wasn't ready to be told I was overreacting. I wasn't ready to hear the word paranoid unless it came from my own mouth. But I felt it. The moment I entered that apartment, I felt watched. Not in the way someone watches TV or checks their phone. This felt like scrutiny. Like I was being evaluated by an unknown set of rules. The air felt heavier. The silence had tension. Even the light bulbs seemed to hum louder, as if I was interrupting something. I wish I could say it stopped there, that it was just a weird month in a weird apartment during a weird time in my life. But that was just the beginning. And what followed turned suspicion into fear, and fear into something else entirely. Something I still haven't found the right word for. Something that doesn't leave even after you change the locks. It reached a point where flipping the light switch felt like opening a door into someone else's room. Each night when I returned, I hesitated, my hand hovering above the switch, heart pounding with a silent question I was too afraid to articulate. Was I the one watching? Or was I the one being watched? I had stopped pretending it was a coincidence. That luxury had expired. There were too many repetitions, too much precision in the pattern. It didn't matter what time I got home, whether it was 2:30 or closer to 4, whether I was exhausted or alert. The outcome was always the same. My lights turned on. Their curtain moved. Never a minute later. Never earlier. Always in response, like I was setting off a silent alarm in a place I had no access to. And it was that consistency that began to unravel me. I tried documenting it at first. I'd write down times, make notes on my phone, record myself walking in and flicking on the lights, pointing my camera toward the alley. But nothing ever showed up clearly. My phone would either focus on my reflection or blur the far side into obscurity. It made everything worse. I had evidence, but it was only emotional. What I saw was undeniable, but what I captured was useless, even to me. One night, I sat in total darkness for nearly an hour, I waited by the window, arms crossed, back hunched, body stiff from fear and cold. I watched the window across the alley. Nothing. No movement. No ripple of curtain. It was dead still. Then, with the quiet resignation of someone too tired to keep resisting, I stood, crossed the room, and tapped the dim light by my couch. I waited 3 seconds. The curtain moved. My lungs stopped working. This time, it was more than a twitch. It was a deliberate pull, a smooth glide of fabric, folding open by just an inch or two before falling back into place. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't nervous. It was calm, controlled, calculated. That single movement carried a message I couldn't yet decode, but it landed somewhere deep inside me. A quiet certainty formed in the marrow of my bones. Someone on the other side was aware of me. Not just aware, focused. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the city fade in and out like waves. And all I could feel was that window across from mine, breathing against my thoughts. The next day, I broke down. I tried to rationalize it with a friend from work, casually at first, like it was a funny quirk of my apartment. You ever feel like someone's watching you through your window? I asked, laughing too quickly, like the punchline was already waiting. She shrugged, didn't look up from her phone. All the time, I live by a bus stop. It didn't help. That was the problem. This wasn't someone passing by. This was someone staying, someone waiting, someone who only ever responded when I revealed myself. I stopped opening the blinds. I taped a towel across the glass, told myself I needed privacy. I moved my couch away from the line of sight. I changed my routine, kept more lights off. But it didn't make me feel safer. It made me feel trapped. I couldn't prove anything. There was no crime, no confrontation, no moment of confirmation, just a slow erosion of certainty. Until one night, I decided to test it differently. I entered my apartment without turning on the lights. I walked to the window silently and stood in the dark, hidden behind the edge of the towel. I wanted to see if they were already watching, if they were looking before I did anything at all. Minutes passed. My eyes adjusted to the black. The alley looked like a still photograph. Then I did something reckless. I pulled back the towel. Not all the way, just a crack, like the sliver they showed me. And I waited. 10 seconds, 20, nothing. I reached for the lamp by the window and clicked it on. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3, there. The curtain moved. This time it was different. It didn't open and close as quickly. It parted, stayed open a little longer. I thought I saw something deeper in the black, a faint glint or silhouette, but it vanished before I could focus. My stomach flipped. Whoever was on the other side, they weren't trying to hide it anymore. They wanted me to know. They wanted me to watch back. I stepped away from the window, sat down on the edge of my futon, and buried my face in my hands. I didn't cry. I couldn't. The fear wasn't sharp or sudden anymore. It was dull and constant, like a fog that seeped into everything. Every corner of my apartment felt tainted. My space, which once felt like a small victory, now felt like a cage with a spotlight overhead. I began to forget what peace felt like. My nights blurred together. I jumped at shadows, flinched at my own reflection, and held my breath, walking past windows, even in other buildings. My thoughts looped endlessly, each one landing on the same unanswerable question. Why me? I didn't talk to anyone about it again. I knew how it sounded. A single curtain moving in the dark wasn't enough to convince anyone that something was wrong, but it was enough to convince me. That was the turning point. That's when I started looking for answers. I remembered the landlord saying during the lease signing that most of the building was vacant, including the back unit. I hadn't thought much of it at the time. It was common for these old buildings to have half their units empty or under renovation. But now it gnawed at me. I needed to know for sure. I found his number in the paperwork and called the next morning, trying to sound casual. Hey, just wondering, do you know if anyone moved into the back unit across from me recently? The one facing the alley? There was a pause on the line. Nope, he said. Still vacant. Has been for months. Why? Oh, just curious, I replied, forcing a laugh. Thought I saw lights or something. Probably nothing. Maybe the wind, he joked. That old curtain's been hanging in there since the 70s. I didn't laugh back. I thanked him and hung up, my hand shaking as I set the phone down. The air around me felt thinner. My ears rang. He didn't know, and if he didn't know, then whoever was in there wasn't supposed to be. They didn't belong. I wanted to believe I was imagining it, but reality was collapsing inward. I was being watched by someone from a locked, supposedly empty apartment, and nobody else knew. I didn't go home that night. I walked around the block twice after my shift, circling the entrance to my building like a stray dog, too cautious to return to a place it used to trust. My key sat heavy in my coat pocket, but I couldn't bring myself to use it, not after what the landlord had said. Still vacant. Been for months. That sentence echoed inside me like a dull chime I couldn't shut off. I wasn't just being watched. I was being watched from an apartment that no one was supposed to have access to. Whoever was behind that curtain didn't belong. That changed everything. Until then, fear had been creeping. Now it crashed through. I called Jamie around 4 a.m. She was my closest friend, the kind of person who'd never hesitate when someone needed her, even if it was in the middle of the night. When she answered, her voice thick with sleep, I didn't even say hello. I just said, I think someone's inside the apartment across the alley, watching me. I need to get out. She didn't ask questions. She told me to grab whatever I needed and come over. I shoved my laptop, wallet, and a change of clothes into a backpack with shaking hands. Every corner of my apartment suddenly felt exposed. The windows, the doors, even the floor felt unsteady beneath me, like I was walking on a stage someone else had designed. I kept the lights off, moved quickly, didn't bother brushing my teeth or changing out of my work clothes. When I opened the door to leave, a gust of air met me from the hallway, a breeze that felt like a warning. I paused. My eyes drifted to the side of the door frame. That's when I saw it, a folded piece of paper, wedged carefully into the crack where the door met the wall. My breath caught in my throat. It was small, yellowed at the corners, crumpled slightly, like someone had fumbled with it before committing. I pulled it out with trembling fingers and opened it. Just one word, written in blue pen, barely legible. Hey. That was all it said. No name, no threat. Just that single, meaningless greeting that somehow felt more invasive than anything else could have. I dropped it instantly. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. The simple casualness of the note turned my insides cold. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't coincidence. Whoever wrote that had stood outside my apartment door. They had been close enough to touch it. Maybe they had touched it. I didn't look back. I bolted down the stairs, 2 steps at a time, clutching my bag so tight my knuckles ached. The street was empty, too quiet. Even the air felt thinner than it had an hour ago. I made it to Jamie's in 20 minutes, practically hyperventilating by the time I buzzed up. She opened the door in pajamas, hair disheveled, eyes wide with concern. "Jesus," she said, "what happened to you?" I couldn't answer immediately. She poured me a glass of water and waited while I tried to find the words. When I finally told her everything, I watched the disbelief melt slowly into alarm. "That's messed up," she whispered. "You're sure no one lives there?" "I asked the landlord yesterday," I said. "He was so casual about it, like it was no big deal." "Did you tell him what's been happening?" "No. I didn't want to sound crazy." "You don't sound crazy." She leaned forward, voice low. "You sound like someone who's being stalked." That word hit hard. Stalked. I had been thinking it, but hearing it said aloud brought it to life. It gave the fear a name, a structure, a shape. We talked until the sun came up. Jamie offered to let me stay for as long as I needed, and I accepted. I wasn't ready to go back. Not alone. Not until I had some kind of closure. The next day, after sleeping a few restless hours, I called my landlord again. This time, I didn't dance around it. "I need you to meet me at the back unit across the alley," I said. "Today, I want to see inside." "Why?" he asked, voice groggy, probably still in bed. "Because someone's been watching me from that window, and I want to know if I'm losing my mind." He hesitated. I could hear it. The silence stretched. "Fine," he said eventually. "Meet me at the back entrance in 20 minutes. Jamie insisted on coming with me. I didn't argue. We arrived before he did, stood in the cold breeze that rolled down the alley like breath from something ancient. The building across from mine looked the same as it always had. Gray, quiet, indifferent. The curtain was still. The landlord showed up 10 minutes late, looking annoyed, but curious. "This better not be a rat problem," he muttered, fumbling with his keys. He unlocked the side door and led us up a narrow stairwell that creaked underfoot. Each step felt like it might collapse. The hallway outside the unit was dim and stale, as if it had been sealed for years. He unlocked the apartment door, stepped aside, and let us in. I held my breath. The room was dark and empty. No lights, no furniture. Just layers of dust settled like snow on the hardwood. The air was musty, thick with age. The landlord flipped on the light and squinted. "See? Nothing." But I didn't hear him. My eyes were already locked on something at the far end of the room. Against the window, facing directly toward mine, a single metal folding chair. It was positioned squarely in front of the glass. Nothing else in the entire apartment. No rugs, no bags, no bottles. Just that chair, placed with chilling precision. My body went still. The landlord stopped talking. Jamie took a step closer, mouth slightly open. None of us said anything for a long time. That wasn't there before, the landlord said finally, voice quieter now. You sure no one else has access to this unit? I asked, still staring at the chair. I mean, he scratched the back of his neck. No, I'm the only one with the key. I turned to him slowly. Then, how did it get in here? He didn't answer. He didn't have to. We all knew what this meant. Someone had been here. Someone still might be. The landlord called the police. They came, took statements, walked through the space. They dusted the chair for prints, looked around for signs of forced entry. Nothing. No fingerprints. No signs of a break-in. Nothing was stolen. Just that one singular, silent monument to presence. That night, I returned to Jamie's and packed up the rest of my things. I wasn't going back. I couldn't. Whatever had happened in that apartment, whatever was still happening, I wasn't going to wait around for it to escalate. I moved out the next day. I wish I could tell you that the discovery of that chair was the end, that the police report and the landlord's apology gave me closure, that I packed my things and left with a sense of safety restored. But truth doesn't work that way. Real fear doesn't evaporate when the facts are laid bare. It festers. It rewrites your instincts. It makes you look over your shoulder, even when there's nothing behind you. Especially when there's nothing behind you. I didn't return to the apartment after that day. Jamie helped me load my essentials into a few duffel bags, and I stayed on her couch while I figured out my next steps. I didn't sleep much. I kept imagining that chair, the way it faced my window so precisely, like whoever placed it there wanted to mirror my routine, sit in sync with my life. That empty apartment didn't feel empty to me. It felt lived in, not in the way people decorate or leave crumbs on the counter. Lived in like an echo, like every part of it had been absorbing my movements, digesting my schedule, syncing itself to my rhythm without ever making a sound. The police never called back. Not after the initial report. I followed up once, asking if they found anything. Fingerprints, evidence, anything at all. The officer I spoke to sounded disinterested, told me there wasn't much they could do since nothing was technically missing or damaged. I remember how he said that word, technically, as if legality was the only metric that defined whether or not something was wrong. But what was taken from me had nothing to do with property. It was trust, autonomy, the invisible layer of safety that makes a home feel like a home. I scrolled apartment listings at night, but every photo I saw, a kitchen, a window, a hallway, became a possible stage for the same nightmare. Every curtain looked suspect, every shadow rehearsed. Jamie tried to reassure me, told me I'd find a new place soon, somewhere brighter, safer, more central. But I couldn't explain to her that safety wasn't a matter of locks or neighborhood ratings anymore. Safety had become internal, and mine had been breached. Sometimes, late at night, I'd wake up and think I saw the shape of a figure through Jamie's window. I knew it was impossible. Her apartment faced a parking lot, but my brain had been rewired to scan for watchers in every reflection. The chair haunted me, not because it existed, but because of what it implied. That someone had spent time in that apartment without permission, without furniture, without any purpose other than to look. That person didn't need anything else. No food, no phone, no light, just a chair, just a window, just me. I started to reconstruct timelines in my head, trying to guess how long it had been going on. A week? A month? Had they been watching me before I even noticed the curtain? Did they watch me sleep? Did they learn the moments I dropped my guard, changed clothes, brushed my teeth? The intimacy of it made my skin crawl. It wasn't just that I had been observed. It was that someone had chosen to make me their world in secret, in silence, without ever letting me know. And for what? That was the worst part. There had been no message beyond the note, no violence, no escalation, just attention, prolonged, deliberate attention. I kept asking myself the same questions, but they only looped back on themselves. There were no answers, just theories, each one more disturbing than the last. Jamie tried to get me to talk to someone, a therapist, maybe. I considered it, but I wasn't sure how to explain what had happened in a way that made it feel real to anyone else. I wasn't assaulted. I wasn't robbed. I wasn't harmed in any way that could be printed on a medical chart. What happened to me lived in spaces between definitions, in the chill before turning on a light, in the slight delay of a curtain falling shut. That's where fear hides. Not in screams, in silences that stretch a second too long. One evening, I ran into my landlord at a nearby grocery store. He looked surprised to see me. "You didn't move far, huh?" he said, trying to sound casual. I didn't smile. "I haven't moved yet. Just staying with a friend." "Right. About that. I had the lock changed on the unit across the alley, just in case." "Did you go back in there?" I asked. His mouth twitched. "Of course. Wanted to check it out again after the cops left. Weird thing, though." He paused. I waited. That chair wasn't there anymore. My stomach turned. "What do you mean?" "I mean, it was gone. Room was empty. Floor still dusty. No footprints. Just gone." I felt like the grocery store around us had disappeared. His voice became distant. The lights too bright. The air too stale. "Did you move it?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "No. I thought maybe one of you came back, but the locks hadn't been tampered with." We stood there in silence. I didn't ask any more questions. There was nothing left to ask. That night, back at Jamie's, I stared at the ceiling and tried to convince myself that whoever it was, whatever it was, had gotten bored. That my absence had ended the game. That I was no longer interesting without a window to look into. But something inside me resisted that conclusion. Whoever had watched me didn't feel like someone who lost interest easily. They felt patient, focused, intentional. The next morning, I began packing my things more seriously. I needed to find a place far from that building, from that alley, from anything that reminded me of the window. I toured places with south-facing windows, wide streets, no adjacent buildings. I paid more than I could afford just for the peace of knowing that no other window stared directly into mine. And even then, it didn't help. Because peace isn't about sight lines or layouts. It's about knowing that you're the only one living inside your moments. That no one is syncing their breathing to yours. That your life isn't part of someone else's ritual. That's what I lost. And I wasn't sure if I'd ever get it back. I moved into a new place within a week. It was a third-floor walk-up in a different neighborhood. Newer building, facing the street instead of another structure. The windows were wide and high up. I chose it precisely because there was no direct line of sight into them. No neighboring glass rectangles that could blink back when I opened my curtains. Still, the first thing I did was install thick blackout shades. Not for privacy, for protection, for the illusion of control. Jamie helped me settle in. She even bought me a small plant for the windowsill. said it would help the space feel alive. I smiled and thanked her. But deep down, nothing felt alive. Nothing felt mine. I kept expecting to see that chair again. Not physically, but in my mind's eye. It had branded itself into my memory. Not because of what it was, but because of what it represented. Someone had sat there for who knows how long, watching, waiting, unmoving, unseen. And now that person, or that presence, was unaccounted for. The chair vanished. The police had no answers. My landlord had shrugged it off like misplaced furniture. But I hadn't forgotten. I couldn't. The question of who had been in that room stalked me more than the act itself. It wasn't just a trespasser. It wasn't just voyeurism. There was something else, something deeper, something that didn't make sense within the limits of logic. Some nights I wondered, what if there had never been a person? What if it was something else entirely? Something that fed off being seen, that existed only because I noticed it. A loop, a ritual, a mirror. I tried to dismiss those thoughts, but they clung to the walls of my mind like mildew in corners. I returned to work, resumed my shifts at the bar, laughed when I had to, nodded along when people complained about customers. Outwardly, I was back to normal. Inwardly, I carried a tension that never left, a constant readiness, like a string stretched too tight for too long. A few weeks passed, then a month, and for a while, I started to believe I was safe, that maybe the horror had an expiration date, that the absence of the chair meant the absence of the watcher. I stopped checking the windows at night. I even opened the shades during the day. The plant started to bloom. I thought, maybe this is healing. Maybe time really does patch things up. But healing doesn't mean forgetting. And sometimes fear has a way of circling back when you least expect it. One night, after a particularly long shift, I got home close to 4 o'clock a.m. The city was quiet, unusually so. I climbed the stairs to my apartment with heavy feet, juggling my keys and a half-finished cup of tea from work. I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and immediately felt it. That stillness. Not the comforting kind. The kind that waits. I told myself I was just tired. I turned on a single lamp by the kitchen and tossed my bag on the counter. My eyes drifted, almost by instinct, to the living room window. The blackout shades were down, but one of the edges had curled just slightly, probably from the fan I'd left running. It exposed a sliver of glass, just a sliver. I froze. My body stiffened before my brain could react. My heart slowed, not racing, not pounding, just heavy. I took a single step forward. That sliver of window revealed nothing but darkness outside. Street lamp shadows stretched across the pavement. No buildings across the way, just the street. But something was off. I couldn't explain it. A sensation, not a sight, as if that single exposed line of glass had invited something in. I reached for the shade slowly, intent on closing it fully. But just as my fingers touched the fabric, I paused. There was a shape on the floor. Not outside, inside, behind me, a reflection. I turned sharply. Nothing there. The room was empty, silent. But my body knew better. I didn't sleep that night. I lay on the couch, blanket clutched tight, eyes glued to the ceiling, too afraid to move, too afraid to even breathe deeply. It wasn't just fear of being watched. It was the fear of being chosen, like I had been selected for something, a ritual I never agreed to, but couldn't escape. The next morning, I looked everywhere. Behind the furniture, inside closets, under the bed. There was nothing. No signs of entry, no messages, no chair. Just the thought, what if they never needed to be across the alley in the first place? What if they were closer than I'd ever realized? That night, I dreamed of the window. Not mine. Theirs, in the dream. I was back in the old apartment, standing at the edge of the room. The curtain across the alley opened slowly, revealing not a person, but a reflection of me. I was sitting in the chair, watching myself, and I smiled. That dream didn't fade when I woke up. It stayed. It lingered. It anchored something inside me. I haven't slept well since. I keep the lights on at all times. I've taped every edge of the blackout shades down. I've covered mirrors, and still, I feel it. The pressure of an unseen gaze that doesn't come from outside anymore. It comes from within. I know how ridiculous it sounds. I've told myself it's paranoia, trauma, residual fear. But deep down, I believe something attached itself to me that night I turned on the light and saw the curtain shift. Not a person, a pattern, a presence, a ritual. I think about that moment often. The first time I saw the curtain move, the way it was so subtle, so easy to ignore. That's how it starts. With a glance, a flicker, a whisper of attention. And if you acknowledge it, if you give it meaning, it grows. It watches back. And now, even in this new place, with thick walls and safe locks, I can't escape the sense that someone, somewhere, still knows my schedule, still mirrors my movements, still waits for the light to come on. I don't look into dark windows anymore. Not mine. Not anyone's. Because I know now that the worst kind of watchers aren't the ones you see. They're the ones who wait for you to see yourself. And when you finally do, they're already inside. I remember the exact moment the fear began. Not the kind of fear you feel during a scary movie or when someone jumps out to startle you, but the kind that crawls up your spine and settles into your bones. The kind that whispers that something is terribly wrong and no one is coming to help you. It started when I was 12 years old, and my family moved to a house deep in the forests of Oregon, miles from anything resembling a town. My parents called it a fresh start. I called it exile. The house itself was ancient, built sometime in the 1940s, creaky and strange, with an attic that always seemed to whisper, and a detached shed that stood about 30 feet behind the back door, like some forgotten monument. I hated that shed the moment I saw it. The paint was peeling, the windows were clouded with dirt, and though I never saw anything inside, I always had this unshakable feeling that something was waiting in there, watching. My dad laughed it off, said it was just an old storage place left behind by the previous owners. He had every intention to clean it out, he said. But of course, he never did. And so it stood there, quiet, broken, and untouched. Our dog, Max, didn't like it either. Max was a golden retriever, friendly, loyal, always ready to play fetch. But something about that shed turned him into another creature entirely. The first time it happened, I was up late reading under my covers with a flashlight, long past the time I was supposed to be asleep. I heard Max growl, a low, guttural sound that I'd never heard from him before. It startled me so much, I turned the flashlight off. Then he started barking. Not excited barking. Not the kind when he wanted to go outside or play. This was frantic, angry, terrified barking that echoed through the house like a siren. I jumped out of bed and ran to the window. The backyard was bathed in that weird silver light that only shows up just before midnight. Matt was by the shed, his body stiff, tail down, fur bristling, staring at something I couldn't see. He barked again and again, and even though I looked as hard as I could, there was nothing there, just trees, darkness, and that shed. After a few minutes, he stopped and trotted back to the porch. But I couldn't shake the feeling that he saw something I didn't. I tried to tell my parents the next morning. My dad just grunted and told me the dog probably smelled a raccoon. My mom said maybe it was a fox or a deer. But I knew Max. I knew what he barked at and what he didn't. That night wasn't about a raccoon. That was fear. Over the next week, Max barked at the shed 3 more times, always at night, always past midnight, and always with that same guttural, panicked voice. I started staying up to watch. I'd sneak out of bed and sit by the window in the dark, blanket wrapped around my shoulders, heart pounding in anticipation, and each time, just as the clock ticked past 2 a.m., Max would stiffen and growl, eyes locked on that same patch of black by the shed. Sometimes the motion sensor light near the back door would flick on and cast long shadows across the yard. But I never saw anyone there, just Max barking at nothing. Then came the footprints. One morning, I woke up to find my dad standing in the backyard, staring at the dirt between the house and the shed. He didn't notice me at first, but when I stepped outside, he turned around with a look that I didn't quite understand. Probably just a drifter, he said, pointing to the deep boot prints in the soil, passed through during the night. I looked closer. The footprints were fresh, sunk deep into the soft earth. They led from the woods directly to the shed and stopped there. There were no prints leading away. That's when I felt it again. That twisting, sinking feeling in my gut. I opened my mouth to speak, but couldn't find the words. My dad was already walking back toward the house, brushing it off. "Nothing to worry about," he said. "We're way out here. Sometimes people pass through." But I knew better. I could see it in his face. He didn't believe his own words. That night, I barely slept. I listened for Max, for footsteps, for anything. Around 2 a.m., Max growled. Then he barked. Then he went silent. I sat up straight in bed, holding my breath. I didn't move. I couldn't. I was frozen with the certainty that if I went to the window this time, I would see something that I could never unsee. I waited an hour, maybe more, before I dared look. Nothing. Just that same old shed and the tall trees behind it swaying gently in the breeze. But I couldn't shake the feeling that someone, something, was watching from the shadows, just out of reach, just out of sight. I started to hate that house, that forest, and most of all, that shed. But it was only the beginning. There are moments in your life when you just know something is wrong. Not because anyone tells you, not because of evidence you can point to, but because every cell in your body is screaming that danger is near. That moment came for me one cold night in early October. I was asleep when I heard it. Footsteps on the gravel outside my window. Not animals, not wind, not imagination. I felt them more than I heard them, like the crunch of weight being slowly pressed into stone, deliberate, unhurried. My body reacted before my mind caught up. I sat up in bed, not moving, not breathing, not even blinking. Every instinct told me not to look, but I couldn't stop myself. I slid quietly from under the covers and tiptoed across the cold wooden floor, each step feeling louder than it should have been. I reached the window, pushed the curtain aside by just a sliver, and looked out. That's when I saw him. A man standing next to the shed door, unmoving, tall, slightly hunched, his coat sagging with dirt and time. His face was hidden in shadows, but his posture was all wrong, like someone not just standing, but waiting, watching. He didn't have the stance of a lost hiker or a curious neighbor. He was too still, too comfortable, like he'd stood there 1,000 nights before. The outdoor light blinked off, and his figure disappeared into the darkness. I stumbled back from the window, heart slamming against my ribs like it was trying to escape. I ran to my parents' room, banging on the door before I even realized what I was doing. My dad opened it, bleary-eyed, wearing his old flannel shirt. When I told him what I saw, he didn't question it. He grabbed his rifle and stormed through the back door without shoes, without hesitation. I watched from the hallway window as he swept the flashlight beam across the yard and up to the shed. But the man was gone. My dad checked the door. The padlock was still on, still intact. He stood there for a while, looking out into the trees, like he was hoping to catch a glimpse of someone hiding among them. Then he came back inside, locked the doors, and sat down without saying a word. I didn't sleep that night. Neither did he. The next morning, he added a new lock to the shed and reinforced the doors with an extra wooden bar from the garage. He didn't talk much while he worked. I think part of him still wanted to believe it was nothing. But deep down, he knew better. Over the next few days, things were quiet. Max seemed calmer. I even started to think maybe it was over, that whoever or whatever that was had moved on. But then Max disappeared. It was a Thursday. I remember because I had just gotten home from school, and Max didn't come to the door like he always did. At first, I thought maybe he was in the backyard chasing squirrels or rolling in the leaves. But when I called his name, nothing happened. I walked around the property, calling louder and louder, checking under the porch, around the shed, by the fence line. Nothing. By evening, my parents joined the search. We walked through the woods with flashlights, shouting his name into the trees. We checked the road, talked to the neighbors. No one had seen him. My mom cried when the sun went down. My dad stood silently by the shed, staring at the reinforced door as if it might answer him. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying every moment, every sound, wondering if I'd missed something, if there had been a sign that Max was in danger. At around 3 a.m, I heard something again, the back door creaking open. I froze, just like I had before. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. Then I heard footsteps, slow, heavy, not in the gravel this time, but in the grass, soft and steady, moving toward the shed. I got out of bed, quietly opened my door, and found my dad already standing in the hallway, rifle in hand. He didn't say a word. We both moved toward the back door at the same time, as if guided by the same fear. The motion light flicked on. That's when we saw him again. The man, standing in the yard just beyond the shed. This time, he wasn't empty-handed. In one hand, he held a knife. In the other, dangling loosely, was Max's collar. I felt the world drop out from under me. My breath caught in my throat, and I couldn't make a sound. My dad shouted something and raised his rifle. The man turned and vanished into the woods like he'd done it 100 times. My dad didn't shoot. He didn't chase. He just stood there, staring into the black tree line, his knuckles white around the gun. I knew what he was thinking. I was thinking it too. This wasn't random. This was a message. He wanted us to know he had Max. He wanted us to see him. The police came the next morning. They searched the woods, questioned us, took our statements, even brought dogs. But nothing turned up. No trace of the man. No sign of Max, no prints, no trail, just that empty collar lying in the grass, cold and silent. I tried to believe Max had escaped, that the man had only taken the collar to scare us. But I knew better. I saw the way he held it. Like a trophy, I knew Max was gone. Something in our house shifted after that. My mom became quieter, constantly checking locks and windows. My dad started sleeping in the living room with the rifle on his lap. And I stopped sleeping altogether. Because the worst part wasn't that Max was gone. The worst part was knowing that the man wasn't done. He had come close, closer than ever. And we had seen his face, even if only in shadow. He had sent a warning. And deep down, I understood exactly what it meant. He was going to come back. I thought the worst part was over. I thought that after seeing the man in the yard, after losing Max, after the police came and went without answers, maybe, just maybe, we had reached the peak of terror and things would slowly start to settle. But that was a lie I told myself to survive the silence that followed. And silence, I've learned, doesn't always mean safety. Sometimes it's what comes before the screaming. For the next few days, everything was quiet. No more sounds outside the window. No more footprints in the dirt. No more flickering lights. My dad still slept in the living room with the rifle. My mom kept her phone charged and within reach at all times. And I lay awake each night, staring at the ceiling, waiting for something to happen, but nothing did. Not right away. Until one morning, my dad stood outside the back door, staring at the shed with a look I didn't understand. I joined him, and he finally said it. We need to check inside again. There was something about his voice that made me feel cold, like he already knew we weren't going to like what we'd find. He took the keys, walked across the yard, unlocked the reinforced padlock, and slowly opened the doors. It was the first time I'd been inside that shed since we moved in. The air was thick with dust and age. The light barely reached the back wall. Tools hung from rusted nails. Tarps were piled in one corner. But the floor, that's where everything changed. The dirt floor had been disturbed. Not just moved around, but cleared intentionally, swept flat, and carved into it were symbols. Deep, deliberate carvings, circles, lines, strange angular shapes that didn't match anything I recognized. They weren't decorations. They weren't accidental. They meant something. My dad knelt down beside them, silent. I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way he clutched the rifle tighter. even though we were alone. "He's been here again," he said finally, barely above a whisper. "Since we locked it." That hit me harder than I expected. The idea that someone had broken in, moved around, created something on the ground right under our noses. It shattered any illusion of safety we had left. Then I noticed something in the corner. A pile of bones. They weren't just lying there. They were arranged deliberately, methodically, in a way that felt ceremonial. My dad moved toward them and crouched low. "Animals," he muttered. "Probably raccoons, maybe deer." But there was doubt in his voice. Heavy doubt. That's when he found the panel. It was a false wall, a piece of rotting plywood that had been nailed to the back of the shed and painted to blend in. My dad pried it off, and behind it was a hole. Not deep, but wide enough to hide things. Inside was a backpack, and not one of ours. It was old, worn, and filled with items that didn't belong to any of us. There were wallets, at least 3 of them, a couple of watches, some torn pieces of clothing, and worst of all, a notebook. My dad didn't want to touch it, but I did. I pulled it out carefully and opened it. The pages were filled with jagged handwriting, sometimes slanting off the lines, sometimes bleeding into the margins. There were drawings, houses, people, shapes that looked like eyes over and over again, and symbols, the same ones that were carved into the ground. It was rambling, incoherent, but intentional, like someone trying to say something they couldn't say out loud, like a warning or a record. My dad called the police again. This time they brought more people. They took the bones, the backpack, the notebook. They roped off the shed with yellow tape and told us to stay out. One of the officers pulled my dad aside, and I watched from the porch as their conversation grew more serious. My dad's jaw clenched, his shoulders stiffened. When the officer left, I asked what they said. "They think it's the same guy," he told me. "Someone who's been seen near other properties like ours. Someone who's off." That's all he said. But I could tell there was more. Things he didn't want to say in front of me. That night, we started packing. My mom moved fast, tossing clothes into suitcases, grabbing photo albums and important papers. My dad took down his tools, made calls to local storage units, and tried to book a rental truck. I sat in my room, staring out the window, trying to feel relief that we were leaving. But I didn't feel relieved. I felt watched. I didn't even need to look. I could feel the weight of eyes on me, like a cold breeze brushing the back of my neck. I turned anyway. I had to. And that's when I saw it. Just past the shed, maybe 10 feet into the trees, there was a face. Not moving, not blinking, just there, watching. And then it was gone. Not like it ducked or ran. It was just no longer there, as if it had never been. But I had seen it. I was sure of it. I screamed my dad's name, shouted until my voice cracked. He burst into the room with the rifle, scanned the backyard, demanded to know where I saw him. I pointed. By the woods, just left of the shed. He didn't wait. He ran outside and disappeared into the dark, his voice rising as he yelled into the trees. The sound of him shouting echoed back and forth between the branches. But there was no response, just silence. When he came back inside, he was shaking, not with fear, but with something worse. Rage. That man had been on our property again. He had been watching us. And no matter how many times the police came, no matter how many locks we added, or how much tape they strung up, it didn't matter. He was never gone. He was always close. And he always knew how to come back. We didn't sleep that night. None of us. The idea that he had come back, that he was still close, erased whatever comfort we thought we'd rebuilt. Every corner of the house felt exposed. Every creak in the walls sounded like footsteps, and every shadow on the window made me freeze in place, half expecting to see him staring back. My parents finished packing before dawn. There was no real plan, no destination. We were leaving because staying no longer felt like an option. The air in the house had changed. It felt suffocating, like we were trapped inside something that wanted us to break. My dad moved with mechanical precision, checking and rechecking the locks, tying straps to boxes, loading the truck bed with everything we could carry. My mom kept glancing out the windows, her arms wrapped around her torso, like she was trying to hold herself together. I stayed close to them, not because they asked me to, but because I was terrified of Wu being alone for even a moment. The police returned briefly in the morning, just to collect final reports. They didn't find new evidence, no new footprints, no broken locks, no sign that anyone had entered the property. But we knew. We didn't need proof. We had seen him. Or at least, I had. My dad didn't talk much. He moved like a man who had lost control of something he thought he could protect. There was a heaviness in his eyes, the kind that doesn't fade with rest. around mid-morning. He asked me to walk the perimeter of the house with him one last time before we left. Not because we were going to stay longer, but because he wanted closure. Or maybe he was looking for something. An answer, a sign, anything that would explain how this had all happened. We circled the backyard, moving slowly. When we reached the shed, the yellow police tape was still fluttering in the breeze. The doors were padlocked again. My dad stood silently, staring at them. He watched us from in there, he said finally, his voice distant. He sat in that shed and watched our lives like a show. I didn't know what to say, so I said nothing. I just stood beside him, the silence stretching longer and longer until even the wind seemed to die down. Then we heard it. Not a noise, not movement, but a presence. It's hard to describe. It was like we both suddenly knew someone else was nearby. We turned at the same time, and there he was, standing at the edge of the woods, barely visible between two tall trees. The same figure, same ragged coat, same stillness. He wasn't running. He wasn't hiding. He was just standing there, head slightly tilted, like he was curious about us, like he wanted to see how far we would go. My dad didn't say a word. He raised the rifle and aimed it. But before he could fire, the man disappeared behind the trees. Not rushed, not panicked, just gone. My dad lowered the rifle and let out a breath. "Let's go," he said. "Now." We left within the hour, drove for hours without stopping. My mom kept looking in the rearview mirror, even though there was nothing behind us but empty road. I stared out the window, watching the trees fade into open fields. But no matter how far we drove, I couldn't shake the feeling that we hadn't really escaped. That night, we stayed at a motel 2 towns over. It was small, quiet, nothing special, but it had 4 walls and a front desk clerk who didn't look like he belonged in the woods. That was enough for me. I tried to sleep, but sleep didn't come. I kept thinking about the shed, the carvings, the notebook, the face in the trees, and Max, especially Max. I pictured his collar in that man's hand, the way it dangled like a prize. I hated myself for not protecting him, for not understanding the signs sooner. Around 3 in the morning, I gave up trying to sleep. I turned on the lamp beside the motel bed and opened my notebook. I started to write everything down, every detail I could remember. The barking, the footprints, the sound of footsteps in the gravel, the symbols in the dirt, the man in the trees. I didn't want to forget. Not because I wanted to remember, but because I needed to. I needed to make sense of what had happened, to take control of it. Writing helped, but it didn't bring peace. That came only when I looked up and realized something that had been sitting in my mind all along, but I hadn't been brave enough to face. This wasn't random. It wasn't a coincidence that we moved into that house. It wasn't chance that he picked us. He had done this before. The wallets, the watches, the clothes in the shed, they weren't just trophies. They were proof. Proof that he had watched others, families, people like us, and the drawings in the notebook, houses, families, eyes. Those weren't art. They were records. This man didn't stumble onto our property one night and decide to stay. He had been doing this for years, maybe decades. He chose us. He watched us. And when it was time, he came closer. I closed my notebook and looked out the motel window. It was dark outside, but something in me refused to look for too long. I didn't want to know what might be watching back. Time moved strangely after we left the house in the woods. Some days felt like hours. Some nights felt like entire lifetimes. But no matter how much distance we put between us and that place, something stayed behind. And something came with us. I don't mean the man. Not literally. I never saw him again. Not his coat, not his face in the trees, not his reflection in a window or silhouette behind a curtain. But his presence never left. He had infected us with a kind of fear that doesn't fade with time. It just learns how to hide. We ended up renting a house in a quiet suburb near the coast, where the neighbors had well-trimmed lawns and kids rode bikes until sundown. It was the kind of place where nothing bad was supposed to happen. But for us, the normalcy only made the contrast sharper. At night, I still kept the blinds closed. I still checked every lock twice. I still walked the perimeter of the house, sometimes without even realizing I was doing it. My dad stopped talking about what happened. He threw himself into work, rarely home before dark. My mom filled the silence with noise, TV shows, podcasts, music playing softly in every room. But I knew she was listening for something else. For creaks, for steps, for signs that what we left behind hadn't stayed behind. School was a blur. I went, I passed, I came home, but I couldn't connect with anyone, because how do you explain that you used to live in a house where someone carved symbols into the dirt while watching your family sleep? How do you casually mention that you saw a man holding your dog's collar like it was a souvenir from a hunt? You don't. So I didn't. Instead, I kept writing, filling notebooks with memories, theories, fragments of dreams that might have been real. I wrote down every symbol I remembered from the shed, every phrase from the notebook the police took, every drawing I could still see when I closed my eyes. Not because I thought it would lead to answers, but because I wanted control. That's what he had taken from us. Control over our space, our time, our minds. And I wasn't ready to give that up permanently. Then, one day, something strange happened. Not terrifying, not violent, just strange. I received a package, no return address, no markings, just a plain brown envelope, soft like it held paper. My mom brought it in and handed it to me with a look I couldn't decipher. I took it to my room and opened it carefully. Inside was a single photograph. It showed a clearing in the woods, not our yard, but something close. And in the center of the photo, barely visible through the grain, was a figure, standing still, coat hanging from thin shoulders, head tilted slightly to the side. Watching. There was no note, no explanation, just that image. My hands trembled as I held it. I didn't show my parents. I didn't tell the police. I didn't even throw it away. I put it in the back of my notebook and sealed it shut with tape. Because part of me believed it wasn't just a photo. It was a message. He hadn't forgotten. Months passed. Eventually, years. Life moved on the way it always does, even when you're still frozen inside. We never went back to the house. My dad sold the property at a loss. The buyer tore it down, built something new in its place. But I've wondered if they ever noticed anything strange. If their pets bark at empty corners. If they see footprints that start and never end. Or if maybe he lost interest the moment we left, like a bored predator searching for new prey. I'll never know. I've thought about reaching out to the new owners, warning them, asking if they've ever felt watched, but I don't, because I'm not sure if telling the story again would set something in motion I don't want to restart. What I do instead is keep my routines. I wake up early. I check the windows. I sleep with a bat under my bed. I never take walks alone at night. And every now and then, I open that notebook. I flip to the last page. And I stare at that photograph until my pulse settles. Until I feel like I've stared him down long enough that he can't win. That I still have some say in how this ends. But the truth is, there are nights when I still dream about the shed. I see its door open slowly. I see the carvings glowing faintly in the dirt. I see Max, alive, barking wildly into the darkness, trying to warn us. And in those dreams, I never reach the door in time. I always wake up too late, covered in sweat, heart racing, eyes wide, listening for a sound I hope I'll never hear again. But I always listen, because deep down, I know something no one else does. I know that some people don't haunt places. They haunt people. And some watchers don't go away. They wait. It was supposed to be one of those carefree, post-college trips. Friends, fresh air, and no screens. But there's a moment in your life when something flips. A sound, a breath, a shadow in a place where there should be none. And after that, the wild isn't just nature anymore. It's alive. It sees you, it listens, and it waits. That summer, we planned the trip like people who had never known real fear. Abby was the one who suggested the Blue Ridge Mountains, probably after seeing one too many reels about scenic trails and misty lakes. Marcus, ever the adventure nut, jumped at the idea. He dragged along his younger brother, Tim, who brought his girlfriend, Hannah, and somehow I got looped in. I didn't even particularly like hiking, but I did like the idea of disappearing into the trees for a weekend with no notifications, no pressure, just air, trees, and people I mostly trusted. We were all in that weird transition space. College was behind us, careers ahead. It felt like we had this sliver of time to act like nothing could touch us. So, we drove 6 hours from the city, deeper and deeper into winding mountain roads, until there was no signal and barely a map trail to follow. We parked near a ranger station, registered our destination with the bored-looking man behind the desk, and took off on foot. The hike in was rougher than I expected. The path narrowed until we were brushing past thick pines and stepping over slick stones and roots. The air smelled like sap and wet moss. It was humid, quiet in that unsettling way the woods are when even birds stop singing for long stretches. We found a clearing by a still, dark lake. The sun was starting to dip behind the ridgeline by the time we pitched 3 tents. Tim and Hannah took one, Marcus and I the other, and Abby insisted on having her own. We cooked hot dogs over a sputtering fire, roasted marshmallows, passed around a bottle of something cheap, and tried to pretend the silence didn't creep in the moment the fire dimmed. We told stories, of course. Some were about college parties, some about exes, and then Marcus started up with ghost stories. He had this one about a hiker who disappeared in these very woods. Everyone groaned, but we all listened. No one said it, but we all felt it. That pulse of tension just under the skin when the dark presses in from all sides, and you remember just how far you are from help. That night, I fell asleep easier than I expected, lulled by the exhaustion of the hike. But around 3 a.m., I woke up to a strange pressure, like awareness before thought. I didn't hear anything at first, just that stillness, like the forest was holding its breath. Then came the breathing, slow, labored, raspy, like lungs full of dust. It was just outside the tent, maybe a foot away from my head. I froze. My first instinct was to tell myself it was Tim or Marcus, maybe even Abby, walking around to pee. But the breathing didn't sound like them. It sounded older, worn out. Each inhale dragged through the silence like it belonged to something that shouldn't still be alive. I didn't move. I didn't even blink. My fingers were inches from my flashlight, but I couldn't bring myself to touch it. That breathing shifted position, like it was circling the tent. Still no steps, no leaves crunching, just breath and movement. It paused near the zipper. I imagined hands right there, inches from me, thin, pale fingers curling around the fabric, ready to pull it open. But nothing happened. Eventually, the sound faded. I don't remember falling asleep again. I just remember the fear crystallizing into a kind of paralysis, and then waking to light filtering through the tent walls. No one said anything over breakfast. Abby looked tired, like she hadn't slept. Marcus was quiet, poking the fire like he was trying to read flames. When I finally asked if anyone had gone outside during the night, Tim raised his hand. "Yeah," he said. "I did. Around 4. Had to pee." But he looked weird as he said it, like he was leaving something out. Marcus glanced at him, then said, "I saw someone by the fire pit. Not one of us. Just for a second." They crouched when they noticed me looking. Then they disappeared. We all stopped chewing. Abby was the first to speak. She said she'd heard breathing too. Not footsteps, just breathing. Hannah said she heard something brush against their tent. At this point, I wasn't sure if we were all spiraling together or if something real had happened. But the next thing proved we weren't imagining anything. Around the edge of our campsite, in the damp soil near the tree line, there were footprints. Human. Bare. Not boot prints like ours. just the wide, smudged impression of someone who had been walking around our tents with no shoes, no protection, nothing but skin against earth. And that's when it hit all of us. We were never alone in those woods. We just hadn't noticed the silence was because something else had been listening. Sometimes. The scariest part isn't the presence you notice, but the silence that follows after you do. When you realize something was there and chose to leave, on its own terms, not yours. We stood frozen around the fire pit, staring at the bare footprints like they were a new kind of language we didn't understand. They were scattered, inconsistent in depth and angle, but unmistakably human. No tread, no rubber soles, just skin and earth, pressed together in places the five of us had never stepped. Marcus bent down, touched one of the prints, like he needed physical proof it was real. His fingers hovered just above the edge, then curled away, like the dirt itself might bite. Tim muttered something under his breath, probably trying to explain it away. But even he didn't believe the words. Abby looked like she might be sick. Hannah had stopped talking altogether. We didn't know what to do with the information. Leaving seemed like the right choice. But it was already late in the afternoon, and the thought of navigating the narrow mountain path in the dark with only our flashlights was not just dumb. It was dangerous. We told ourselves it was probably a prank, someone out there, maybe another camper, someone who thought it'd be funny to scare the city kids. That was the story we clung to, because the alternative, the idea that someone had been circling us in the dark, barefoot, without ever making a sound, was too big to hold in our minds. So we stayed. That night, we built a bigger fire. None of us said it, but we positioned our chairs closer together. The laughter from the night before was gone. Every twig snap in the woods sent our heads swiveling. We clutched flashlights like weapons. Around 2 a.m., something shifted. The woods quieted in a way that felt deliberate. Not natural stillness, but like something had stepped into the center of all that life and pushed it away. Then came the sound. Movement, slow and deliberate, crushing underbrush not far from the edge of the clearing. Marcus stood first, flashlight raised. We followed his gaze. For a moment, there was nothing. Then, barely lit by the edge of the fire's glow, we saw him, a man crouched behind a tree, fully naked. His skin looked pale, stretched thin like parchment. His limbs were bent in angles that felt unnatural. His head tilted just slightly, like he was studying us. When the light hit him, He didn't flinch the way a person would. He moved with this jerking retreat, fast but animal-like, as if he had to remind himself how to use his body. And then he was gone, back into the dark. Hannah let out a noise, sharp and terrified, but no one screamed. We just stared at each other, confirming silently that we had all seen the same thing. Tim jumped to his feet, pacing, saying we needed to pack up and leave. Marcus shook his head. "That's exactly what he wants," he said, "for us to scatter, to separate. If we leave now, we're alone on a trail in the dark with someone following us." Hannah protested, said it was insane to stay after seeing him. Abby kept whispering, "We should have never come." I couldn't argue. I wanted to leave more than anything, but I couldn't shake the image of that man's posture, his stillness. It wasn't just that he was watching us. It was how calculated it all seemed, like he knew what we'd do next. So we made a plan. We'd sleep in shifts, 2 awake at all times, flashlight in hand, seated by the fire. The rest would try to sleep in the tents. It wasn't perfect, but it was the best we had. Marcus and I took the first shift. The others filed into their tents, not even bothering to change out of their clothes. The night dragged. The fire popped and shifted, casting tall shadows against the trees. For hours, nothing happened. I started to think we had scared him off. Maybe the light, the numbers, the noise, it had been enough. I started to let my mind drift, started to let hope slip in. And that's when the whisper came. A low voice, almost playful, but impossible to understand. It didn't come from the trees. It came from between the tents. Marcus and I snapped our heads at the same time. We didn't speak. We didn't move. I raised the flashlight slowly, hands trembling. The light swept across empty air, but the voice came again. Closer. Marcus bolted upright and took off toward the sound. I shouted, trying to stop him, but it was too late. His flashlight beam disappeared into the trees. I was alone. I stood, frozen, uncertain whether to follow him or stay. That's when the tent beside me shifted. A zipper. Not pulled quickly, slowly, deliberately. I turned the flashlight just in time to see the zipper halfway down, with no one's hand on it. From the inside, Hannah screamed. I lunged, pulling the zipper back up, calling for everyone to wake up. Tim burst out of his tent, wild-eyed. Abby followed. Marcus came running back, saying he had lost him in the trees. We were shouting, overlapping, panicked, and exhausted. The rest of the night passed in a blur. No one slept. We sat in a circle by the fire, flashlights aimed in every direction. At one point, Hannah sobbed. Abby rocked back and forth, with her knees tucked under her chin. We waited for the sun like it was salvation. And when the first threads of light broke over the ridge, we didn't celebrate. We moved with purpose, packed everything in record time. We didn't even eat, just rolled up tents, stuffed our bags, and hiked back down the trail with one eye always glancing behind us. Because deep down, we knew just because the night ended didn't mean he was gone. The scariest part of being hunted isn't the chase. It's knowing the thing that wants you has time. It doesn't need to rush. It only needs to wait until your fear starts thinking for you. We didn't speak much on the hike back. The trail that had once felt like an adventure now felt like a corridor with no exits. Every tree looked like it had eyes. Every sound, however faint, twisted into footsteps in our minds. Abby walked close behind me, her hand sometimes brushing mine, like she was making sure we were still real. Tim had taken the front, scanning every bend in the trail like a soldier on patrol. Marcus stayed at the rear, turning around every couple of minutes. His jaw clenched so tight I could hear it grinding even in the silence. Hannah kept her eyes down, hugging her pack like it would protect her from anything that might reach out from between the trunks. When we finally made it back to the ranger station, it felt like surfacing after being held underwater for too long. We explained what had happened. At first, the ranger's expression was unreadable, like he was weighing how much of our panic was just leftover adrenaline. But as we described the footprints, the breathing, the zipper, and the naked man crouched behind the tree, something in his face changed. He didn't look surprised. He looked tired. When we mentioned the voice, his eyes shifted toward the woods behind the station. He leaned back in his chair, rubbed his face, and said he'd heard stories. Not official ones, nothing written down, but things passed between the rangers and locals. Hikers sometimes came back shaken, not injured, just changed. Some had seen shapes in the woods. Others had heard whispers or breathing. A few had even reported missing belongings or footprints around their campsites. One group claimed to have seen a man standing in the lake, motionless, waist deep in water, just watching them for hours before disappearing beneath the surface. The ranger said they'd never caught anyone, but there had been reports. Maybe it's one guy, he said. Maybe it's more than one. We don't know. Some say they've been out there for years. That sentence, out there for years, sat heavy in my chest. It meant this wasn't a one-time thing. It wasn't some random psycho who just happened to find us. It was a pattern, a system. We had walked into someone else's hunting ground. He let us go. I thought that realization wrapped around me like ice. He could have done worse. He chose not to. That's what made it worse. We left the ranger station and drove for hours, none of us saying more than a few words. When we finally reached cell service, our phones exploded with messages, missed calls, notifications, but none of it mattered. The noise of real life felt fake now, like it belonged to a world we didn't live in anymore. Over the next few days, we tried to go back to normal, but normal doesn't come back easy when something has fractured it. Abby quit her job at the coffee shop and moved back in with her parents. Tim and Hannah broke up within a week. Marcus stopped answering texts. I tried to write it all down, to make sense of it, but the words never came out right. They felt hollow, watered down. Because how do you explain a fear that has no face? A presence that doesn't need to touch you, to hurt you? Then, 2 nights after we got back, I found something. It was just past midnight. I was sitting in bed, trying to ignore the itch behind my eyes that wouldn't let me sleep. My room was dark, lit only by the glow of my phone screen. I had this sudden urge to get up, to check the front door. I don't know why. Maybe instinct. Maybe something deeper. I walked down the hall barefoot, heart already beating too fast. The door was locked, but on the floor, just barely slid under the frame, was a piece of paper, folded once, no envelope. I picked it up with 2 fingers, like it might bite me. The handwriting was sloppy, jagged, written in pencil. Just 2 words. Found you. I didn't scream. I didn't move. I just stood there, holding that piece of paper, trying not to fall into the spiral that was already opening beneath my feet. I checked the windows, all locked, nothing outside, no movement. But the silence felt familiar now, heavy, waiting. I called Marcus, no answer. I called Abby, straight to voicemail. I called Tim, and he actually picked up. His voice was hoarse, like I had woken him up. When I told him what I found, he went silent. Then he said something that made everything worse. He left one here too. I asked what it said. The same thing, Tim replied. Same handwriting. I asked when. He said 2 days ago, the day after we left the campsite. He hadn't told anyone. I was stunned. I asked if Hannah had gotten one. He didn't know. They weren't speaking anymore. That's when I called Abby. This time, she answered. Her voice was shaky, uneven. I didn't even have to ask. She said she found one in her car, taped to the back seat headrest. Same words, same writing. I asked if her parents saw anyone. She said no. The garage was locked. No signs of a break-in. That's when it hit us. It wasn't over. It had never been over. Leaving the forest didn't end anything. We had been marked, watched, not hunted, not yet. But something had changed. The game had followed us home. The worst part? We didn't know if he was alone, or if there were others, or if someone we passed on the street, someone walking a dog, or taking out the trash, was part of it. Someone who had seen us in the forest, and now watched us in the city. The fear didn't come in spikes anymore. It came in waves, constant, familiar. And the silence wasn't comforting now. It was a reminder that somewhere, just outside the edge of my vision, something waited. For days after the note appeared at my door, I barely slept. I kept the blinds drawn, locked and double-locked every window and door, turned on motion lights that buzzed all night long. But it didn't matter. The fear didn't live outside anymore. It had moved in, claimed space inside my chest, curled into the back of my throat. My phone became the only link I trusted. And even that was fragile. I texted Marcus constantly. He never replied. I knew he was reading them. Blue check marks gave that away. But the silence from him felt personal. I think he blamed himself. He was the one who led the hike. The one who said we shouldn't leave the campsite that night. The one who chased the voice into the woods. Abby sent me voice messages at odd hours. Sometimes they were calm, sometimes shaky, always short. Just her saying she couldn't stop checking the locks, or that she'd woken up certain someone had been in her room, even though nothing was touched. She didn't need me to answer. She just needed to say it out loud. Tim was the only one who pretended things might go back to normal. He kept suggesting we meet up, talk it out in person, get some air, go on with life. I knew what he was doing. He was desperate for this to be something he could fix. But I couldn't pretend. Not after the second note. It came 5 days after the first. Same paper, same handwriting. This one wasn't slid under the door. It was placed under my pillow. I had made my bed that morning. I was sure of it. I slept with the door locked, the windows shut, the alarm system armed, yet somehow it was there when I woke up. Just a single word this time. Closer. I didn't scream. I didn't panic. I just stared at it for a long time, sitting cross-legged on my mattress, like if I moved, it would vanish. That day, I called out of work, something I rarely did. I sat on the floor of my kitchen with my back against the fridge and started to think, really think, because this wasn't random. It was escalated, deliberate, and no matter how impossible it seemed, someone was getting in. I started cataloging everything, every sound, every misplaced object, every flicker of light that didn't feel right. I kept a notebook, like some kind of personal incident report. I wrote down what time I locked the doors, when I checked the windows, which rooms I had entered, how I left them. I wasn't trying to prove anything to anyone else. I was trying to prove to myself that I wasn't going insane. But no matter how many precautions I took, the notes kept coming. Always short, always direct, never more than 2 words. Beneath, closer, soon. The 4th note was the worst. Not because of what it said, but where I found it. I had just returned from the store, where I bought groceries I didn't really need, just to feel normal for an hour. I placed the bags on the counter, went to change out of my jacket, and when I came back to the kitchen, the note was sitting atop the loaf of bread. I hadn't heard anything. I hadn't left the door open. The locks were untouched. The note read, "Watching." I didn't call the police. I had once, after the 2nd note, but they found no signs of forced entry and advised me to consider counseling. I understood their response. It did sound like paranoia, but it wasn't. This wasn't in my head. Whoever it was, they were careful. They didn't leave prints. They didn't trigger alarms. They didn't take anything. They just left pieces of themselves behind, like breadcrumbs made of fear. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the living room with every light on, armed with a baseball bat, and my phone camera pointed at the door. I waited, and nothing happened. No knocks, no shadows, no new notes. But as the hours dragged on and dawn began to stretch across the walls, I realized something chilling. The fear didn't come from what might happen anymore. It came from what wouldn't. Because as long as he didn't act, I couldn't react. I couldn't scream or fight or call for help. I was just a character in his game, forced to wait for the next move. And that kind of waiting, powerless, invisible, is a kind of torture that doesn't leave bruises. The next day, I finally heard from Marcus. A single text. He was in my apartment. I called him immediately. He picked up on the second ring, breathing hard like he'd just been running. He told me he had woken up at 3 to the sound of something dragging on the floor. When he turned on the light, there was nothing there. But his closet door was open. It had been closed when he went to bed. Inside, nothing had been taken or moved, except for one thing: his hiking boots, the same ones he wore on the trip. They were placed in the middle of the closet floor, side by side, cleaned, no dirt, no scuffs, just clean. And inside one of them, folded and tucked against the heel, was a note. Same paper, same pencil. One word: return. That's when the pieces started to form a shape. He didn't just follow us. He wanted something. Or maybe the forest wanted us back. The note didn't feel like a threat. It felt like an invitation. I asked Marcus what he was going to do. He didn't answer right away. Then he said he needed to think, that he'd call me later. I told him not to go anywhere alone, that we needed to stick together. But I already knew, in that space between his words, that he was thinking about going back. Because sometimes fear doesn't push you away. It pulls you in. Because even the hunted get curious about the hunt. There's a moment in obsession when fear becomes curiosity. Not the kind that frees you, but the kind that drags you deeper because you think understanding it might protect you. It won't. Marcus didn't call me that night. I stayed up waiting, my phone beside me like a lifeline. The silence wasn't just unsettling anymore. It was confirmation. I tried to convince myself that he just needed time, that maybe he turned it all off, like a switch, and decided to reclaim his peace. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the truth. He had always been the one who pushed boundaries, who needed to see the source of the fear before he could let go of it. So, I did what I hoped I'd never have to do. I went to his apartment. I knew the building, small, quiet, tucked on a side street with barely enough foot traffic to be noticed. His car was parked out front, untouched. I buzzed his number. No answer. I called his phone. Straight to voicemail. I knocked. No response. I waited another 10 minutes before walking around back, where his unit faced a narrow alley lined with trash bins, and overgrown ivy. One of his windows was slightly open. It was small, barely big enough to squeeze through. But Marcus had always kept it unlatched, said it made him feel less boxed in. I hesitated only a second before climbing onto a crate and pulling myself through. Inside, the apartment was still, too still. The kind of still that feels like a pause, not a rest. His living room looked normal. His shoes were by the door, keys in the bowl. A half-drunk glass of water sat on the coffee table, the surface still glistening like it hadn't been long. But when I stepped into the hallway toward his bedroom, something shifted. The air was thicker, heavier, like the silence had weight. His door was open, and I could see him sitting on the edge of the bed, back to me, head down. "Marcus?" I asked, voice dry. He didn't move. I stepped closer. "Marcus, it's me." Still no response. My heart was pounding now, every step tighter than the last. When I reached him, I realized his eyes were open, but unfocused. He wasn't asleep. He wasn't hurt. He was somewhere else entirely. In his lap was a journal, the one he used to sketch in during college. The pages were full, crammed with jagged shapes, symbols I didn't recognize, and faces, dozens of them, all with eyes too wide, mouths too small, all staring forward. At the bottom of one page was a single sentence: "He lives in the quiet." I reached out, touched his shoulder gently. He blinked once, then turned to look at me. "He's not a man," he said. "He never was." His voice was so calm, so certain. It frightened me more than anything else. I asked him what he meant, but he only shook his head. "He doesn't want us to leave. That's why he followed us." I asked if he meant to go back. He nodded. I told him he was losing it. He said, "Maybe, but it doesn't matter. I need to know if it's just him." That word just cut through me. It meant Marcus had seen more than he told us. Maybe not that night in the woods, but after. Maybe in the notes, or in dreams, or in the patterns he saw in his sketches. He stood, gathered a backpack, and slung it over his shoulder. I grabbed his wrist. "We go together," I said. "You're not doing this alone." For a second, I thought he'd refuse. But then something flickered in his eyes. Relief. Maybe. Or resignation. We called Tim and Abby. They were hesitant, terrified, but something in our voices must have reached them, because the next morning we were on the road again, all 5 of us, back to the Blue Ridge Mountains. The drive was quiet, but not like before. This time, it was layered with unspoken truths. We knew we weren't going back to camp. We were going back to confront something that had already followed us out. The ranger wasn't there when we arrived. The station was locked. We left a note just in case. Then we hiked. The trail felt different now, like it remembered us. The trees leaned closer. The air pressed harder. Every bend in the path felt like a threshold, and we crossed them with the kind of tension people reserve for rituals. When we reached the lake, the clearing was just as we'd left it, only older somehow, like the woods had aged it in our absence. The fire pit was collapsed. The grass had grown longer, but the presence, that was still there. We didn't speak. We set our things down, not to camp, but to wait. The sun dipped fast, swallowed by clouds and distance. The moment dusk settled, we felt it. Not a sound, not a breath, just wait. And then, at the edge of the trees, he stepped out, naked, pale, thin as a shadow stretched too far. His eyes were not curious, they were patient. Behind him, 2 more figures emerged. Same posture, same stillness, different faces, all silent, all watching. We didn't move. We didn't run. We just stared. And in that stare was an understanding none of us could explain. We were never alone out here, and he was never the only one. We stood in that clearing, our feet sunk into the damp forest floor, our breaths shallow, barely audible above the dense stillness that wrapped itself around us like a living thing. The 3 figures at the edge of the trees didn't move. They didn't speak. They didn't rush us. They just existed. They stood like the woods had carved them out of root and shadow. Not born, but shaped. And the moment you see something that wrong, that silent, that utterly void of explanation, a part of your mind fractures, not from terror, but from helplessness. Tim whispered something under his breath, but the sound felt foreign, like noise wasn't meant to be in that moment. Marcus stepped forward slightly, just a shift of weight, but even that felt like a declaration. The central figure tilted his head, slowly, almost gently, and then, as if tethered to his movement, the other 2 faded backward into the trees, not walked, not ran, just gone. like they had never stood there at all. Only he remained. We couldn't look away. His eyes, though dark and sunken, held a strange kind of knowing. Not rage, not threat, something deeper, a calm built not on peace, but on permanence. He belonged here. We didn't, and we never had. Abby broke first. Her knees gave slightly, and she stepped backward, stumbling into Hannah, who caught her. I moved instinctively to steady them both. That small, human gesture felt like rebellion in the face of whatever this was. And it worked. The figure turned, no words, no sudden movement, just a pivot into the trees. And this time, we followed. No one said it out loud. No one asked if it was smart or safe or sane. We just followed, like we were meant to. Like this was where the story was always headed. The trees grew tighter. The light thinned. But we moved forward. The trail wasn't marked. It wasn't even a trail, just flattened grass, disturbed leaves, space where footsteps might have passed long ago. He stayed just ahead, never running, never looking back, but always moving in a straight, deliberate line. After what felt like hours, we entered a hollow, a space cut deep into the hillside, ringed by moss-covered stones and half-buried bones. At its center was a tree, gnarled and split, its base swirlsa and dark, like an open mouth. And beside that tree stood something different, a structure, small, wooden, almost like a hunting blind, but wrong, too low, too narrow, too decayed. And inside it, we saw the chair, a single folding chair, old, rusted, placed precisely in the center, facing the tree. And on that chair, something sat. Not a person, not a body, just objects. A pile. Marcus stepped forward, his face pale, his hands trembling slightly. He reached into the pile and pulled out one item. A watch. Tim gasped, not from fear, but recognition. It was his. The one he lost on the second night. Abby moved beside him and saw a necklace, the silver chain, dull but familiar. Her grandmother's cross. She'd worn it on the trip. It had gone missing the night we heard the breathing outside the tent. And then I saw it. My journal. The one I kept in college. The one I thought I had misplaced months before we even planned the hike. Pages missing. Ripped. The remaining ones scribbled over with symbols I didn't recognize. It was never about the notes. It was never about scaring us. It was about keeping us, pieces of us, souvenirs. We backed away slowly. The air had changed. He was no longer there, not physically, but his presence was... It pressed against our backs as we moved away from that hollow, retraced our steps without speaking, without thinking, just retreating. When we finally saw the clearing again, the sky had started to turn. Blue bleeding into orange, the sun rose slow and uncertain, as if reluctant to chase away what we had seen. We didn't say goodbye. We didn't pack up. We didn't stop to look back. We walked, then we ran. By the time we reached the ranger station, we were silent. We left no notes. We signed nothing. We just got in the car and drove. That was the last time I saw any of them in person. Abby moved across the country. Hannah deleted all her social media. Tim transferred to a school in Europe. Marcus, he stopped responding. His number disconnected. His apartment emptied out. No one knew where he went. Sometimes, in the early hours of morning, I wonder if he went back, if he gave in fully, if the forest called him by name and he answered. As for me, I never went camping again. I never stayed anywhere without 2 exits. I never let my windows stay open. But most of all, I never ignored silence. Because the truth is, silence isn't the absence of sound. It's the presence of something waiting, something listening. And once you've felt it, truly felt it, watching you, breathing with you, you realize something that changes you forever. You were never alone. You just didn't know where to look.